Hi, and welcome back to my channel. Today's case takes us to Australia, where we are going to cover a really famous case regarding David and Catherine Birnie. The trigger warnings for today's case are sexual assault, kidnapping, as well as murder. So without any further ado, let's get on to the video. David Birnie was born on the 16th of February in 1951 to his parents Margaret and David in Watergrove, which is located in the western of Australia. David was the eldest of 5 children, and growing up there are a lot of speculations on his family being promiscuous and also alcohol addicts. There were also rumors going around about potential incest within the family. The home was said to be very dirty and it wasn't necessarily cleaned. No one really cared about cooking, so the kids had to basically eat whatever they could find in the fridge. As for Margaret, she was said to be an alcoholic and would smoke a lot of cigarettes, which in the long time had a huge effect on her voice. It is also said that she would offer sexual favors for free taxi rides. One time she was on the bus with, I'm assuming, her youngest child, and baby's crying, but Margaret, totally annoyed by the crying, hands her baby to a complete stranger and goes to the other end of the bus to smoke a cigarette, and she would only take her baby again when it was time to get off the bus. Margaret would also abuse her children verbally as well as physically. She would hit them with a broom, and the abuse became so much that all of her 5 children were put into foster care eventually. And this life had already taken a huge toll on David because he started his life of crime when he was only 8 years old. It started off with petty theft and burglary. His teacher would also realize quickly that David was becoming more and more aggressive over time. He would draw really creepy things. When he would draw, David would put so much pressure on it that either the paper would break or the pen would break. In 1960, the Birnie family would pack up and move to Perth. And it was there where David would meet a girl called Catherine Harrison. Catherine was born on the 23rd of March in 1951 to her parents Doreen and Harold. And her parents lived just next door to where David would move in with his family. Unfortunately for Catherine, she would end up losing her mom Doreen while she gave birth to her youngest son, and the baby would also end up losing his life. Catherine would move to South Africa with her father, but their relationship became just so dysfunctional as Harold was just struggling to take care of his daughter that at the end he decided to send her back to Australia for her to live with her grandparents. And throughout her whole upbringing, Catherine was very, very lonely. She wasn't allowed to bring friends over to play with. Well, she didn't really have any friends that she could bring home because the parents of her classmates didn't want their kids to hang out with her, as to them she just seemed very weird. Once Catherine turned 10 years old, her father decided that he wanted to bring his daughter back in his life. And there was a whole custody battle between him and the grandparents, where Harold ended up gaining the whole custody of Catherine. So she ended up moving in with her father, and that's when she met David. Since she was lacking attention and approval from her family, Catherine was immediately fascinated with David because he showed interest in her. But the two actually lost contact with one another because David's parents decided to get a divorce. And shockingly, neither one of the parents actually wanted David. So he kind of became a ward of the state. David dropped out of school when he was 15 to start an apprenticeship as a jockey. And whilst working there, he harmed 3 of the horses there. He also once broke into a woman's apartment, naked with a stocking on his head, and tried to sexually assault the woman, but he didn't go through with it and actually ended up losing his job because of this incident. In 1966, David and Catherine would cross paths once again, and they immediately caught on to where they left off, but by this point, David had been convicted of many crimes. robbery, theft, as well as assault. And on top of that, he had a sex and porn addiction, so he was pretty much in and out of prison. So as soon as they met again, they started to commit crimes together. On the 11th of June in 1969, they were first caught and charged with 11 counts of theft, breaking and entering. Both of them pled guilty, and therefore David was sentenced to 9 months in prison. As for Catherine, who by the time was pregnant with another man's child, received probation. The next month, they both appeared before the Supreme Court, where they were charged with additional 8 counts of theft. That added 3 years onto David's sentence and 4 years for Catherine's probation. David escaped prison on the 21st of June in 1970, where he met Catherine once again and just continued on with the crime spree. They were quickly caught though on the 10th of July in 1970, so basically a month later. But this time they were charged with 53 counts of trespassing, burglary, as well as illegal operation of a vehicle. During their arrest, police officers discovered wigs, radios, as well as dynamite and detoners. This time David received 2.5 years in prison. As for Catherine, she was sentenced to 6 months in prison, and she would actually end up giving birth to her baby whilst in prison. But the baby was immediately taken off of her. Once Catherine's 6 months were up, she received custody of her baby, and since David was still behind bars, Catherine found herself a job as a nanny for the McLaughlin family. Around that time, Catherine had also gotten involved herself with the youngest son of the family called David. And soon she fell pregnant with David's child, and Catherine and David ended up getting married on his 21st birthday. And in November, Catherine gave birth to his second child, Donnie Jr. One day, the couple was having some of their friends over, and Donnie Jr. was just crawling around and somehow got into the driveway outside at the same time as one of their friends was just backing out. This friend unfortunately didn't see Donnie Jr. and so he ran him over. So Donnie Jr. ended up losing his life only 7 months after his birth. Shocked and devastated over the loss of their son, Catherine and Donald were still there for one another, and they would end up having 6 more children throughout their marriage. Donald worked as a council employee, and once he suffered a back injury, making it unable for him to work, the whole family was forced to move into a counseling house. And so going back to David Birnie, once he was released from prison, he also found himself in a marriage with a woman called Carrie. David met Carrie through his brother in 1974, and it's said that the relationship between the two progressed relatively quickly, and the couple would end up having a daughter called Tanya. At first everything seemed to be going great until David suffered a head injury, and with that injury his whole personality changed. He would belittle his wife and constantly cheat on her. And this went as far that David moved his own daughter Tanya out of her room so he could move into his room with his new girlfriend, who was 16 years old at the time. And that was the breaking point for Carrie. She took her daughter and just left David. At the same time though, Catherine had just given birth to her youngest child, and she was just like, alright, that's enough kids. I'm going to the hospital to get a hysterectomy. Donald, Catherine's husband, went to the hospital after her procedure just to find David in her room holding her hand. And after she was released, she went to visit David. And whilst there, she called Donald and basically said, I'm leaving you and the kids, take care. So now she moves in with David and even changes her name to Birnie, although they never officially got married. And still, David continued to be in and out of prison. He actually reconnected with his youngest brother, James, who was in prison for sexually assaulting his 6-year-old niece, claiming that she led him on. In December 1984, David's brother James would move in with his brother and Catherine, and that's when he saw himself just how addicted David was to sex. He had his whole porn collection going on and would need to have sex up to 6 times a day. So while James was sleeping on the couch, David would actually bring random women to the house, and he would sleep with them on a mattress that was directly next to the couch. It was also around the time that Catherine and David were taking a break from one another. And it is said that David forced his brother to participate in his sex parties. And it's also said that the brother would continue to have intercourse with each other for over the next 2 years. In 1986, James turned 21, and his gift from David was that he allowed James to have sex with his girlfriend Catherine. And apparently that was the first time that James actually had sex with a woman. So that's for this dysfunctional relationship. In 1985, David was harassing a woman called Audrey Schofield, who was working as a receptionist at a local real estate agency. This agency was located at a local mall, and David would just sit there every day and just watch Audrey. As soon as she was alone, he would come in and say the weirdest things to her, trying to get Audrey to leave with him. And this became so much for her that Audrey decided to tell her husband about the situation. So her husband came in and basically told David to never show his face ever again. On the 6th of October in 1986, a 22-year-old woman by the name of Mary Nielsen was attending the University of Western Australia, where she was studying psychology with the goal to work as a counselor with the Department of Community Welfare. And on this day, Mary had basically the whole day off since her courses were scheduled at night. So she decided, since her parents weren't in town, I believe they were somewhere in the UK on holiday, Mary went to a local car shop, which was the same shop where David worked. Now, it is said that David was actually a very good employee. He would always turn up on time, he was basically never sick, and accidentally was paid much more than he actually earned once. So after David noticed, he went ahead and returned the money. So Mary and David get talking, and he shows her some tires, and after a while he kind of like mentions, yeah, I have some tires that are still in very good condition. If you want to come over later, I can do it for much cheaper. Now, since Mary was trying to save up some money, she agreed, and around 5 p.m. she arrived at the Moorhouse Street. David entered the door and immediately held her at knife point. He proceeded to drag her into the bedroom, gagged her, tied her to the bed, and proceeded to repeatedly assault her. And while the assault was going on, Catherine was just casually sitting there, encouraging David to keep going. She would basically just sit there and ask him questions and write it down. And 1 year prior to the assault on Mary, Catherine started to research on how to murder someone and get away with it. She would also tell David which girls to abduct. They had a special code whenever they saw a girl that Catherine would approve of. She would say to David, I've got the munchies. So yeah, back to Mary. David and Catherine put her in the car and drove about 54 kilometers away to Glen Eagles National Park, where David would assault Mary one more time before strangling her to death. After David killed Mary, he dug up a hole, threw her body in it, but before that he actually stabbed her in the chest just to make sure that she was really dead. David actually parked Mary's car in front of a police station, and the police discovered her car after 6 days. So they put her on a missing person, but nothing was actually ever done about it. 2 weeks after the murder on Mary Nielsen, on the 20th of October in 1986, Catherine and David were just driving around looking for the next victim And the couple didn't really go for any specific type. They didn't really care about characteristic age. They would just see someone who caught their eye. And on this day, a 15-year-old girl called Susanna Candy was the one who caught their attention. Susanna is described as a free-spirited and wild girl. Susanna attended the Hollywood High School in Shenton Park in Perth, and she was a very good student on top of it. Her father, Dr. Douglas Candy, was an eye surgeon at St. John of God Hospital, and he always took good care of his daughter. Susanna at one point started to work at a local restaurant, and on this particular night, her dad, for some reason, couldn't pick her up. So she was just like, alright, no problem, I'm just gonna walk. So she was now hitchhiking, just trying to get back home as quickly as possible. And that's when one particular car stopped for Susanna. She saw the couple and so she got in. And once she was inside the car, a knife was immediately held to her neck. While she was being tied up and brought back to the house of David and Catherine, where David proceeded to assault her. This time though, they didn't want to kill Susanna as fast as they killed Mary. So the couple forced Susanna to write letters to her family and friends to let them know that everything was okay and that she was off to Queensland to have some fun there, and that no one needs to worry about her. David even made Susanna call her parents, just to make sure that the parents wouldn't be alarmed and call the police. Catherine wrote everything down for Susanna to repeat, and after the phone call was made, David kept on assaulting Susanna for the next few days, where Catherine would actually join in here and there. Eventually though, David did get tired of her and ended up strangling her to death. But this time it was way harder for David to kill her, because Susanna wasn't going down without a fight. So they forced sleeping pills down her throat, and once Susanna was completely out, David handed Catherine a piece of rope and told her, if you really love me, you kill her. And Catherine strangled Susanna to death without blinking an eye over it. The couple put her body in the car and drove to Glen Eagles Forest to bury Susanna's body, which was actually pretty close to where Mary's body was. As for Susanna's parents, the sent letter didn't really have the effect they were hoping for, because as soon as her parents received those letters, they went straight to the police because Susanna was only 15 years old. Not even 2 weeks after the murder of Susanna, David and Catherine found their next victim, a 31-year-old woman called Nolene Patterson. Nolene was working at the Netherlands Golf Club in Victon as a bar manager, which was only about 10 minutes away from where David and Catherine lived. On the 1st of November in 1986, Nolene was on her way back home when she ran out of gas. So she pulled over to the sideway, and soon after she was joined by David and Catherine, who offered to drive her to the next gas station. Nolene probably didn't really think anything of it. Maybe just a nice couple that wanted to help out. So she got inside the car, and immediately a knife was held to her throat as the couple drove back to their house. Only this time it was a little different than the last two attacks, because Nolene was just going along with it. She pretended to enjoy it, and David became emotionally attached to her, which made Catherine furious. 3 days passed, and that's when Catherine just snapped. She came into the room with a knife in her hand and basically told David, look, you have two options. Either you kill her or I will kill her myself. So David, with his back now against the wall, forced sleeping pills down Nolene's throat and proceeded to strangle her to death. And again, they drove back to Glen Eagles Forest and buried her a little further away from where Mary and Susanna were buried. During the entire drive, Catherine was just so mad at Nolene, and she was cursing her dead body out, And when they actually got to the burying part, Catherine started to throw dirt into her face. Only 3 days later, on the 4th of November in 1986, David and Catherine caught their next target, a 21-year-old woman called Denise Brown. Denise worked part-time as a computer operator. She lived with a boyfriend and another couple in the Netherlands. And she was described to be a very friendly and loving girl who liked to party and dance. On the night of the 4th of November, Denise went out partying. And when she wanted to go home, she went outside to wait for a bus to take her home. But before the bus arrived, Catherine and David came along and offered her a ride, which she just gladly accepted. Just like usual, once Denise got inside the car, a knife was being held to her throat, drove back to their home and proceeded to assault her. And just like with Susanna, David forced her to call up her friends and family, but once her boyfriend had heard about the call, he became very suspicious. The attack lasted for 2 days, and on the 6th of November, Denise was forced to swallow sleeping pills. Just this time, David and Catherine took Denise to a completely different location, about 60 kilometers away to Wanneroo Pine Plantation. David proceeded to assault Denise 2 more times before stabbing her in the neck. And then the couple got into digging a hole for her, but as they were trying to bury her, Denise just sat up all of a sudden, gasping for air. Panic started to rise in David, and so he took his shovel and hit her on the head. He then went on to grab an axe and hit Denise 3 more times in the head until she ended up losing her life. At this point, the media was also starting to get a hold of the story, talking about the missing girls and if there was any connections between them. But it still wasn't really all that big of a news. And as for the police, it was more of a runaway cases. On the 9th of November, a 17-year-old girl called Kate Moyer was decided to be the next victim of Catherine and David. She was out in a pub and later on went to the Clearmount Hotel to see the band Lick the Lizard. Around 10:30 p.m., her friends in the band offered to drive her back home, but Kate just told them to drop her off at the corner and she'll just walk the rest because she wanted to sober up on her way back home. Along the Stirling Highway, nearly the same spot where Susanna Candy was abducted, Kate was hitchhiking and guess who pulled up? Catherine and David. Again, they asked if she needed a ride, which she just gladly accepted, and they even drove her to her home, but as she tried to get out, Kate realized that there were no handles. So she was like, okay, what's going on and why are there no handles? And that's when David grabbed her head and pulled her in between the front seats where he held a knife to her throat, before driving back to their house on Moorhouse Street. Once at their house, Kate was forced to strip down to her underwear and put all of her belongings into a plastic bag, which Catherine wrote her name on it. Kate then went on to take a shower, and when she was finished, David and Catherine asked her a lot of questions. If she had a boyfriend, if she was taking the pill, and once they were done, the 3 of them actually sat down to watch Rambo. And while they watched the movie, they also started to smoke cigarettes as well as weed. Catherine and David started to talk about their previous victims and even had newspaper articles with the report of Denise Brown on it. And Catherine started to laugh. Kate asked her what was so funny, and that's when Catherine started to talk, and that's when Kate kind of realized, okay, they are telling the truth. Kate had a feeling that she was going to die, and she also knew that she needed to leave evidence around the place for when they are finally caught. She left one of her lipstick under a beanbag. David and Catherine left the room for a few moments, and Kate managed to put a pack of cigarettes up a manhole in the roof. She also left her friend's driver's license around the place. At around 12:30 a.m., the assault started to take place, but this time David was more passionate. After he was finished, Kate took another shower and was then chained to the bed. She asked the couple if she could write goodbye letters to her loved ones, which they actually granted her. And the moment that Kate was left alone in the room, she just started to scream for help. Upon hearing her scream, David ran back and assaulted her. And he also chained himself to her and tried to force her to swallow sleeping pills. But Kate didn't swallow them. She waited until David was asleep and just spat them back out. The next morning, David and Catherine forced Kate to call her parents and tell them that she was safe, that she was just staying with some friends. After the reassurance, David went on to go to work, leaving Kate and Catherine behind, and Kate knew that she had to take her chance. She was listening to music and just trying everything to gain Catherine's trust. They also talked about the movie that they watched the night before, and Catherine actually unchained Kate to go outside smoking. Catherine had a side business selling drugs, and one of her customers came knocking on her door to purchase some weed. So Kate was sent back to the bedroom, and that's where she just took her chance. She climbed out of the window and took off running until she arrived at the local supermarket. After explaining what had happened, the police was called, but once they arrived and took her to the station, police didn't really take Kate all that serious. So, not really believing her story, they brought in a 22-year-old woman called Laura Hancock to take a look at this case. Laura was pretty new to the team. She had just finished her academy. So she listens to Kate's story, and her story just stayed consistent and also provided a lot of details. Kate told Laura about the aliases that her abductors were using. They called themselves John and Margaret. Kate also described exactly what the house looked like and where it was located. At this point, Laura had heard enough, so she told her higher-ups, like, this girl is really telling the truth. So Detective Paul Fricuso and Detective Vincent Kadich went to 3 Moorhouse Street to take a look. So going back to Catherine, once she realized that Kate was gone, she completely freaked out. She called David and pretty much was like, guess what? Kate is gone. Oops. Once the detectives arrived, they found the house empty, so they just wait outside, and shortly after Catherine arrives, the detectives immediately approach her, asking her questions, and she was pretty snappy and also angry towards them. Nonetheless, the detectives had a search warrant, and they immediately found something suspicious because the fireplace was used and it looked like it was used to get rid of potential evidence. As they kept looking around the house, they found all the evidence that Kate had claimed she had left there. Her lipstick was found, as well as the pack of cigarettes. Kate was even able to name the label that was printed on the sleeping pills. After that, the detectives had more than enough evidence to back up Kate's story. So David and Catherine were arrested and brought in for questioning. Catherine was like, I've never seen this girl in my life, but David, on the other hand, was saying, yes, Kate did come to our house because she wanted to smoke some weed with us. And then one thing led to another, and we did have sex, but it was consensual. So after hours of interrogation, Detective Kadich told David, let's just go and dig up some graves. To which David actually responded, okay, there are 4 graves. So after David's confession, police told Catherine that it would be better to just come clean now, which she did. After she gave her full confession, the couple was taken in 2 separate cars to Wanneroo Pine Plantation, where David would lead them to the body of Denise Brown. The next stop was at Glen Eagles Park to Mary Nielsen's body. Almost next to Mary, they found Susanna Candy's body. Catherine was insisting that she shows the officers where Nalene Patterson's body was buried. And for the whole way, she would just say how much she hated Nalene and that she even spit on her grave after they buried her. David and Catherine were charged with 4 counts of murder, and the trial was set on the 12th of November in 1986. David and Catherine actually needed to wear cloaks because the public hated them so much. But the couple didn't really seem to care at all, as David was even blowing kisses to the crowd and Catherine was just smiling the whole time. The second hearing was set on the 10th of February in 1987, and even more people gathered as both Catherine and David pled guilty to all 4 counts of murder and 1 count of abduction as well as 1 count of rape. On the 3rd of March 1987, both Catherine and David Birnie were sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences. David was sent to Fremantle Prison, and once the prison closed down in 1991, he was transferred to Casuarina Prison, and whilst in prison he had a very hard time as the other inmates would beat him regularly. David and Catherine wrote over 2,600 letters to each other, and around 1990, David started to negotiate with authorities for him to be able to see Catherine. In July of 1992, David claimed that he had also committed other murders with Catherine and that he'll only give them details if he could see Catherine. So the authorities told Catherine about David's request, but this time Catherine just didn't want anything to do with David anymore. She didn't want to see him, she didn't want any letters, she didn't want to talk to him, she didn't want to meet him. And upon hearing that, David was like, well, alright, but there isn't really anything else that I want, so I'm not gonna tell you any details until I get to see Catherine. The officers actually took David on a drive for about 5 hours, just driving around Perth, but he didn't say one word for the whole ride. And even after Catherine broke off all contact with David, he still continued to write her letters. He actually wrote the last letter a few months before he took his own life on the 7th of October in 2005 by hanging himself. And after his passing, no one came to claim the body. So he was buried in a turquoise grave by the state government. Shortly before his death, David was actually being accused of assaulting another inmate. This inmate is referred to as Peter, and in 1999, Peter was 23 years old, and he claims that David, as well as another inmate called Adrian Barrett, who was a convicted sexual offender on children, had sexually assaulted him, and he was actually granted $70,000 in compensation. As for Catherine Birnie, she is still in Vandia Women's Prison, where she was assaulted by other inmates once she arrived in prison. For the first year, she talked to David and even tried to write to her children. She wrote the following letter in 1987, where she said, "By now you would have heard I've been charged with murder and other things. Please try to understand what I did was never meant to hurt anybody, but what I did was because I love David. Love is a very powerful thing, and I found out it can make you do things you wouldn't normally do. It was because of my love for David that those things happened and went on happening. Be careful who you love and to what extent you love that person." She also went on writing that she would always love David and not to be ashamed of her. Like I've mentioned, Catherine had cut off all communications with David, and when later asked why, she said it was because David was weak and because she was so much stronger than him that she wouldn't need him anymore. As of now, Catherine is still in prison, where she had become the head librarian of Bandit Prison. And she still enjoys being so famous for her murders that she started to exchange letters with other well-known serial killers. Catherine's husband Donald, remember, she never really gotten divorced from Donald. He died in 2000, and when Catherine heard the news, she had made a request to go to his funeral, which was denied. Peter, Catherine's son, who she abandoned when he was still a kid, apparently was severely beaten up for just being her son. Peter actually said that when his mother finally dies, he's going to throw a party for an entire week. And when asked if he had anything to say to his mother, Peter only said, "Hurry up and die already." The house on 3 Moorhouse Street was abandoned for 12 years and has actually changed its owners for over 12 times since 1998. It has been renovated and sold for 425,000 Australian dollars in June of 2020. So yeah, that's it for today's case. As always, please let me know on which case you'd like to see me cover next. I hope I see you all in my next video. Take care, bye!